There is something extremely important you need to understand because most people never recognize it until they have already been deeply hurt. There comes a point where someone is no longer simply behaving in a toxic or manipulative way. They reach a stage where destruction becomes part of who they are. When a narcissist completely surrenders to their darkest impulses, abandons every sense of conscience, and no longer feels any need to hide their cruelty, they cross a line that many people do not even realize exists. Most of us like to believe that true evil belongs in books, movies, or history, but the reality is far more unsettling. Darkness often grows quietly inside ordinary people. It works little by little, encouraging dishonesty, feeding selfishness, and rewarding manipulation until the person gradually stops fighting against it and eventually embraces it without hesitation. This is why narcissists can become so incredibly dangerous. Their lives are often built around illusion, control, manipulation, and an endless need to dominate everyone around them. It is important to understand that this is not simply about someone being proud, selfish, or full of themselves. Those traits alone do not explain what happens here. This goes much deeper than ordinary arrogance. When a narcissist reaches the point where they abandon whatever empathy or humanity remained inside them, certain unmistakable signs begin to appear. These are not harmless personality traits or minor character flaws that people can overlook. They are serious warnings that something much darker has taken control. Ignoring these signals can place you in the path of someone who no longer values compassion, accountability, or basic human decency. You are no longer dealing with an emotionally immature person. You are facing someone whose entire way of thinking has become centered on domination and destruction. Have you ever encountered someone whose presence instantly changes the atmosphere in a room? Someone who seems to drain hope, confidence, and peace from everyone they interact with? Maybe you have met a person who appears strangely energized whenever someone else is suffering, or who manipulates people with such calculated precision that their behavior almost feels emotionless. That kind of conduct should never be dismissed as ordinary dysfunction. It reflects a level of emotional corruption that goes far beyond everyday conflict or insecurity. The frightening reality is that once someone reaches this point, they rarely have any desire to change. Logic no longer reaches them. Honest conversations accomplish nothing because they no longer value truth. They have chosen control over connection, deception over honesty, and power over genuine love. If you continue playing their games or believe you can somehow outsmart them, you place yourself at serious emotional and psychological risk. That is why recognizing the warning signs matters so much. The 3 signs we are about to explore are not meant to create fear without reason. They exist to help you protect yourself before the damage becomes irreversible. If you notice even one of these patterns consistently showing up in someone close to you, take it seriously. Do not convince yourself that enough patience, sacrifice, or understanding will eventually change them. There may have been a time when they carefully hid behind a convincing mask. They knew exactly how to appear caring, thoughtful, generous, and emotionally available whenever it benefited them. They worked hard to build an image that earned trust and admiration. But once that mask begins to fall away, you start seeing something completely different. They stop pretending to care because maintaining the illusion is no longer necessary. What remains underneath is far more disturbing than most people are prepared to face. One of the earliest changes is subtle enough that many victims miss it. Their behavior becomes noticeably colder. They no longer settle for winning arguments or proving themselves right. Instead, they begin humiliating people simply because they enjoy watching the emotional impact. Lies become entertainment rather than protection. Every misunderstanding they create, every conflict they ignite, and every moment of confusion they cause becomes a source of satisfaction. You may notice an unsettling calmness when they witness someone crying, an amused smile when another person's confidence begins to collapse, or a strange excitement when they succeed in making someone question their own memory or reality. Most people hurt others during moments of anger, fear, or emotional weakness, then eventually feel guilt afterward. But someone who has fully embraced this darker path causes pain because they genuinely want to. The suffering of others becomes emotionally rewarding, and that is when the situation becomes truly dangerous. When another person's suffering becomes their greatest source of satisfaction, you are looking at something far more serious than an unhealthy personality. Their sense of importance no longer comes from achievement, love, or meaningful relationships. It comes from domination. Every tear, every moment of confusion, and every emotional wound gives them the feeling of being powerful. That is why their behavior cannot be dismissed as simple selfishness or emotional immaturity. There is something much darker driving them. The next time they embarrass someone in public, twist the truth to make another person question themselves, or intentionally say something they know will cause emotional pain, stop and observe their reaction. Do they seem troubled by what they have done, or do they appear strangely pleased? Do they watch closely, almost waiting to see the emotional damage unfold? Those reactions reveal far more than their words ever could, because genuine remorse is replaced with satisfaction. What makes this pattern especially disturbing is that their cruelty is not reserved for enemies or strangers. They eventually direct it toward everyone who becomes emotionally close to them. Friends, relatives, romantic partners, and even their own children can become targets. In fact, the deeper the emotional connection, the greater the sense of control they experience when they manage to break that person down. This explains why nothing you ever do feels like enough. You can remain loyal, endlessly patient, deeply loving, and completely devoted, yet they continue finding reasons to criticize, humiliate, or emotionally exhaust you. Your kindness does not soften them because your pain serves a purpose in their mind. They begin measuring success by the amount of emotional damage they can inflict. If they can leave you doubting yourself, questioning your judgment, or feeling emotionally shattered, they experience that as victory. Instead of seeking healthy connection, they become addicted to the feeling of psychological control. The most painful realization is that there is no natural stopping point. Healthy people eventually recognize when they have crossed a line. They feel guilt, reflect on their actions, and try to repair the damage they caused. But someone trapped in this destructive mindset rarely reaches that moment. They do not pause to wonder whether they have gone too far, because, in their mind, there is no such thing as too far if it keeps them in control. That is why it is so important to pay attention not only to their actions, but also to their expressions. Watch the satisfaction that appears when someone else is crying. Notice the confidence that grows after they have shattered another person's self-esteem. Observe the coldness behind their smile when they know they have succeeded in causing emotional pain. Those moments should never be ignored. Hoping they will suddenly wake up filled with regret often keeps people trapped far longer than they should be. As time passes, another disturbing shift begins to appear. At first, they hide their deception carefully, mixing small pieces of truth with carefully crafted lies so that their stories sound believable. They create just enough uncertainty to make you question your own conclusions while protecting their image. Eventually, however, they stop making that effort. They no longer feel the need to disguise what they are doing because they have convinced themselves that reality is whatever they decide it should be. They lie naturally, confidently, and without the slightest hesitation. Even more unsettling, they often appear to believe the stories they create. You can present undeniable evidence, clear memories, written messages, recordings, or witnesses, and they will still deny everything with complete certainty. They will insist the event never happened, accuse you of misunderstanding the situation, and confidently place all the blame back on you until you begin questioning your own perception. At that point, the issue is no longer ordinary dishonesty. It becomes an attempt to replace reality with a version that serves their needs. They reshape the past while everyone involved remembers it differently, expecting others to accept their version without resistance. Facts become irrelevant because maintaining control matters more than objective truth. If you challenge their story or refuse to participate in the illusion, they immediately shift into attack mode. Suddenly, you become the liar, the unstable one, the unreasonable person, or the source of every conflict. They reverse responsibility so quickly that the original issue almost disappears. Instead of answering for what they did, they force you to defend your own sanity. This constant rewriting of reality is one of the most damaging forms of psychological manipulation because it slowly erodes confidence, weakens trust in your own judgment, and leaves you wondering whether your own memories can still be trusted. In a matter of moments, the entire situation is turned upside down. Suddenly, you are labeled as the unstable one. You become the dishonest person, the one whose memory cannot be trusted. They reshape the story with such confidence and precision that even people who witnessed what really happened begin questioning their own recollection. This is one of their greatest weapons. They do not simply manipulate conversations or relationships. They attempt to reshape reality itself until their version becomes the only version people hear. Every time they succeed without consequences, their confidence grows stronger. They begin telling lies that seem so outrageous you cannot imagine anyone believing them, yet they repeat them with complete certainty. Whether they truly believe those stories or simply convince themselves to, the outcome is the same. Facts lose all value. The only reality that matters is the one that protects their image and gives them the greatest advantage. Eventually, the deception extends far beyond individual events. It becomes the foundation of who they are. Their identity itself turns into a carefully constructed performance. One moment, they present themselves as the innocent victim who has been mistreated by everyone around them, deserving endless sympathy and compassion. The next moment, they transform into the courageous hero who always acted with the best intentions and sacrificed everything for others. They move effortlessly between these roles, choosing whichever identity gives them the most admiration, influence, or emotional control. If anyone dares to expose the truth behind the mask, they immediately launch a campaign to protect the false image they have created. They will spread rumors, distort conversations, and convince others that you are the dishonest one. Before you even have the opportunity to explain your side, they have already planted doubt in the minds of everyone around you, making it incredibly difficult for the truth to be heard. There was once a time when they at least pretended to have a conscience. They copied emotions they did not genuinely feel. They imitated remorse, apologized when it benefited them, and acted as though guilt still existed somewhere inside. Over time, even that performance begins to disappear. The hesitation fades away. The difference between right and wrong no longer carries any meaning for them because their only concern is getting what they want. Most people, even after making serious mistakes, still carry an inner voice that reminds them of the pain they caused. That voice creates discomfort, regret, or restless nights filled with reflection. But when someone has fully embraced this destructive pattern, that inner conflict becomes almost non-existent. They do not lose sleep over betrayal. They do not question whether they crossed a moral line. They simply take what they want, leave emotional devastation behind, and continue as though nothing significant ever happened. If you try confronting them with the consequences of their actions, do not expect genuine understanding or accountability. More often than not, you will be met with emotional emptiness. They may stare back without concern, showing no sign that your pain affects them in any meaningful way. Sometimes the response is even more unsettling. Instead of sadness or regret, you may see a faint smile, almost as though they are entertained by the fact that you still expected empathy from them. They watch your heartbreak, your confusion, and your tears without sharing any of the emotional weight. In their distorted way of thinking, your suffering confirms that they remain in control. That belief becomes deeply rewarding for them. The more emotionally overwhelmed you become, the more convinced they feel that they have successfully established their power over you. What makes this stage especially dangerous is that the normal limits guiding most people begin to disappear completely. Fear of consequences no longer influences their decisions. The possibility of being exposed does not create shame, and guilt no longer acts as a barrier to harmful behavior. Without those internal boundaries, their actions often become more extreme over time. Betrayals grow more severe because nothing inside them encourages restraint. They violate trust without hesitation, manipulate situations with calculated confidence, and damage other people's reputations without losing a moment of sleep. Deception, exploitation, broken promises, and calculated cruelty are no longer tools used only when necessary. They become habits that reinforce their sense of superiority. Every successful manipulation convinces them they are beyond accountability, and that growing feeling of invincibility only fuels even greater levels of emotional destruction. The hardest truth to accept is that, at this stage, there are no special exceptions in their mind. It makes no difference whether you are a close friend, a romantic partner, a parent, or even their own child. If sacrificing your well-being helps them protect their image or achieve their goal, they will not hesitate. They can look directly into your eyes, speak words of affection, promise loyalty, and make you believe you are deeply valued while secretly planning actions that will leave you emotionally devastated. That contradiction does not trouble them because they no longer see relationships as bonds built on trust. Instead, they view life as a competition where every interaction produces either a winner or a loser. Their greatest fear is losing control, so they become willing to cross boundaries most people would never consider. When guilt, empathy, and accountability disappear, almost nothing remains to stop their behavior from becoming increasingly destructive. Their influence extends beyond ordinary manipulation because they carefully shape how people experience reality. Every conversation, every silence, every carefully chosen word serves a purpose. Nothing is accidental. They think several moves ahead, studying reactions and adjusting their behavior to maintain control over the people around them. What makes this so dangerous is that their tactics are usually subtle rather than dramatic. They rarely begin with obvious lies or open aggression. Instead, it starts with a slight change in tone, an expression that makes you second-guess yourself, or a pause placed at exactly the right moment to create uncertainty. They slowly plant doubt until you begin questioning your own judgment more than theirs. Once that happens, they no longer need to argue because you start doing the work for them. You begin searching for flaws in your own thinking while they quietly strengthen their hold over the situation. Their control is not limited to words alone. They also know how to influence the emotional atmosphere around them. Many people notice that the energy in a room shifts the moment they arrive, even if they remain completely silent. With a single glance, they can make someone feel insignificant, and with carefully timed praise, they can make another person feel uniquely important. They study emotional reactions with remarkable precision, learning exactly what motivates, weakens, or excites the people around them. Instead of using that understanding to build healthy relationships, they transform it into a tool for control. One of their most effective strategies is creating emotional dependence. They introduce confusion, criticism, and instability until a person feels exhausted and uncertain. Then, just when their target feels completely overwhelmed, they step forward, acting as the only source of comfort, guidance, or reassurance. They create the wound, then present themselves as the cure, keeping the cycle of dependence alive. This pattern becomes even more destructive when they begin manipulating entire groups of people. They quietly spread partial truths, suggest misleading ideas, and plant tiny seeds of suspicion that gradually grow into major conflicts. Without realizing it, friends begin doubting one another, families become divided, and trusted relationships slowly fall apart. Meanwhile, they remain in the background, observing everything while avoiding responsibility for the damage they caused. By the time people recognize what happened, they have already positioned themselves as either the innocent victim or the misunderstood person everyone feels compelled to defend. Trying to challenge them becomes incredibly difficult because they are usually planning several moves ahead. While you are still explaining the truth, they have already prepared another version of the story. They refuse to play by ordinary rules because changing the rules is one of the ways they maintain control. Every time you believe you finally understand their behavior, they shift tactics again, making the situation even harder to untangle. Perhaps the most unsettling transformation is the way they eventually abandon even the appearance of moral values. In the beginning, they often work hard to seem honest, compassionate, and trustworthy. They know exactly what people expect from someone with integrity, so they carefully perform that role until they earn acceptance and confidence. Over time, however, the mask begins to disappear. They no longer pretend to admire kindness, honesty, or genuine compassion. Instead, they often dismiss those qualities as weaknesses to be exploited. Principles that once appeared important suddenly become objects of ridicule, and anything sincere or meaningful is treated with contempt. If you observe them carefully, you will notice this change reflected not only in their words, but also in their attitudes, their reactions, and the way they respond whenever they encounter goodness, humility, or genuine acts of love. That quiet contempt reveals just how far they have drifted from the values they once only pretended to possess. They do not merely distance themselves from truth, they actively fight against it. People who choose honesty, integrity, responsibility, or compassion often become targets of their ridicule because those qualities expose everything they have worked so hard to hide. Someone who lives with genuine character reminds them of the emptiness they refuse to confront within themselves. Instead of looking inward and accepting responsibility, they direct their anger toward anyone who represents the values they abandoned. Watch how they react whenever someone speaks about loyalty, accountability, faith, or genuine love. Rather than showing respect, they respond with sarcasm, contempt, or open mockery. Goodness unsettles them because it reflects a standard they cannot comfortably face. Instead of becoming better, they attempt to convince everyone else that goodness is meaningless. Rather than lifting themselves up, they focus on pulling others down until integrity appears foolish and selfishness seems normal. Over time, their attitude grows even more extreme. They begin acting as though they are beyond consequences, believing no one has the right to question their behavior. Accountability becomes something they laugh at, while personal responsibility is treated like a weakness rather than a strength. They behave as though they answer to no one except themselves, convinced they can manipulate every situation without ever facing the results of their choices. This belief makes them especially dangerous because once someone feels completely above moral limits, very little restrains what they are willing to do. They also try to weaken the values of everyone around them. They challenge your principles, pressure you to compromise your standards, and repeatedly test whether you are willing to abandon your beliefs to keep the peace. Every time you refuse to surrender your integrity, their carefully crafted charm begins to disappear. The pleasant mask slips away, revealing bitterness, resentment, and open hostility toward anything they cannot dominate or corrupt. When they realize they cannot control you, their reaction often becomes intense. Their anger is not simply about disagreement. It comes from losing influence over someone who refuses to bend. Suddenly, the warmth disappears, replaced by coldness, hostility, or explosive rage. In those moments, you begin seeing the side of them they worked so hard to keep hidden. It becomes obvious that the issue was never love, communication, or understanding. The real issue was control. They cannot tolerate someone who continues standing firmly in truth because it threatens the illusion they have spent years creating. Around people like this, many describe an unsettling feeling that is difficult to explain with words alone. It is not always tied to what they say or do. Sometimes it is simply the emotional atmosphere surrounding them. Their presence can feel unusually heavy, leaving you mentally drained, emotionally scattered, and strangely disconnected from your own confidence. That experience should never be dismissed when it happens repeatedly. You may notice that before spending time with them, your thoughts feel clear and your emotions feel balanced. Yet after a single conversation, you leave feeling exhausted, uncertain, and emotionally depleted without fully understanding why. It can feel as though your confidence has quietly been stripped away. While this experience is rooted in psychological manipulation rather than anything supernatural, its effects are very real. Narcissistic individuals often depend on creating emotional reactions because confusion, conflict, and instability give them a greater sense of control. They thrive when other people become anxious, defensive, or emotionally overwhelmed. Over time, they create an environment where peace becomes difficult to maintain, where every discussion turns into tension, and where you constantly question your own judgment. The more emotionally worn down you become, the harder it feels to set healthy boundaries or walk away, which only strengthens their influence over your life. If you eventually gather the courage to confront them or calmly point out the harm they have caused, notice what usually happens next. Instead of reflecting on their actions or accepting responsibility, they quickly redirect the conversation back toward you. They accuse you of being too sensitive, too negative, too emotional, or impossible to please. Before long, you find yourself defending your own character instead of discussing the original issue. This endless cycle leaves you increasingly drained while accomplishing nothing. That is why these relationships rarely become peaceful through greater effort alone. Their goal is not mutual understanding, but continued control. The healthiest response is recognizing that you are not responsible for carrying the emotional burden they continually create. You do not owe unlimited patience, endless explanations, or repeated chances to someone who consistently refuses accountability. Real freedom begins when you stop participating in the cycle altogether. As you create distance, the emotional fog gradually lifts. Your confidence slowly returns, your thoughts become clearer, your energy begins to recover, and for the first time in a long while, you realize what it feels like to breathe without carrying the constant weight of someone else's manipulation.